Hi everybody, I am Brian Mullins the Fox. I am about to explain to you all in a rant 5 reasons why this whole Jack the Ripper unknown singular serial killer case is a lie. Number 1, according to Aaron Kosminski's Wikipedia page, there are multiple suspects, either implicated to be one said serial killer or just suspected at all. I can just name these here in a screenshot that I'm about to show you right now, but I think it's easier to do it this way. So let's start with the first batch of 15 out of 30. There were only 4 identified, convicted, and executed serial killers. Let's start with them, and I'll name them right now. The first one, George Chapman, a convicted Victorian-era Polish serial killer, convicted and executed for killing 3, maybe 4 mistresses, but none of them are part of the canonical 5. Thomas Neil Kareem, a convicted serial killer for the deaths of 5 people in both Illinois and Middlesex, UK, and finally executed by hanging. There's Frederick Bailey Deeming, a British-born Australian man who was a serial killer, but only convicted for the death of his entire family and executed by hanging. And then there's Karl Feigenbaum, a German-born serial killer convicted of first-degree murder and executed at the Sing Sing prison in Ossining, New York, for the deaths of between 1 to 13 plus. We'll get back to Karl Feigenbaum later in this video. Now let's get straight to the innocent men who never murdered anybody, or about 7 of them in the first batch. Montague Druitt, a man falsely implicated for being the serial killer in question, committed suicide. Jacob Eisenschmidt, who wasn't a serial killer at all, much less the supposed Jack the Ripper figure. Given that the suspect in question was imprisoned when the murders of Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes occurred in the early hours of September 30th, 1888. John Pizer, an innocent man who never killed anyone. James Thomas Sadler, another falsely implicated and innocent man who got compensation from a newspaper that called him Jack the Ripper. Francis Tumblety, an Irish-born American medical quack who never actually murdered anybody, and no, his mustache should not have fooled anybody, let alone the Scotland Yard. Robert Donston Stephenson, an innocent British writer and journalist falsely accused and implicated of being Jack the Ripper. And Prince Albert Victor, Duke of Clarence and Avondale, another one but part of the British royal family, and yeah, he never murdered anybody. Let's continue with only 2 singular murderers that aren't serial killers. First and foremostly, Aaron Kosminski, a murderer who can only be possibly attached to the death of one of the canonical 5 victims, Catherine Eddowes. And finally, William Henry Berry, a murderer who was only convicted and executed for the murder of his own wife, Ellen Berry. And finally, for the first batch of 15 suspects, let's get over the 2 people that were only convicted for an attempted murder. Michael Ostrog, a Russian criminal who was only convicted for theft, scamming, fraud, robbery, and at least 1 attempted murder that presumably failed. And finally, Thomas Hayne Cutbush was only convicted of an attempted murder that also presumably failed as well. Now let's get to the second and last batch of 15 implicated suspects of 30. There hasn't been any more identified, convicted, and executed serial killers. Let's just go over all the innocent men who never murdered anybody in this batch. Joseph Barnett, another innocent man, falsely speculated to have been this Jack the Ripper killer, if you will. Speculation without evidence can just as easily be dismissed as not evidence at all. Willie Clarkson, another innocent man caught up in a massive insurance fraud scheme and didn't kill anyone. William Gull, another innocent man that's also an English physician, caught up and falsely accused of withholding information on this supposed Jack the Ripper figure. George Hutchinson, a false witness to a crime he wasn't there to have seen be committed, yet he didn't even kill anyone himself. Charles Allen Lechmere, another false witness, and yet he himself didn't kill anybody for sure. Jacob Levy, another innocent man who was also known to be a butcher, never a murderer, and was said to have suffered from what was called at the time general paralysis of the insane. Then there's James Maybrick, an innocent English cotton merchant that was supposedly known for being the Jack the Ripper figure, and yet murdered by his own fucking wife, Florence. There's Michael Maybrick, James's brother, an innocent English musician who had nothing to do with being Jack the Ripper as much as he was related to James Maybrick, who again was murdered by his own fucking wife, Florence. Then there's Walter Sickert, an innocent German-born British painter and printmaker, and not a murderer, let alone a serial killer in any way at all. Joseph Silver, an actual pimp and criminal who ended up not murdering anybody. So for the sake of this classification, he's technically innocent outside of his lesser criminal escapades. James Kenneth Stephen, an innocent British man who was driven to the edge mentally and passed it up to his death in 1892. And didn't kill anybody. Sir John Williams, 1st Baronet of the City of London, an innocent Welsh physician who never killed anyone, let alone committed any crime at all, given that he's, of course, part of the royal family somewhat at that time. And then there's Littleton Forbes Winslow, an innocent British psychiatrist who was involved being another false witness to the murders, all falsely alleged to have been committed by one singular serial killer. Now let's get to the last two singular murderers that aren't serial killers. James Kelly, a convicted murderer for sure, but only for the death of his own wife, Sarah Brider. He was executed by hanging. And then there's Mary Piercy, a convicted murderer who was later hung for murdering her lover's wife, Mrs. Phoebe Hogg, and a child named Tiggy, who was killed on October 24th, 1890. Mary was executed on December 23rd of the same year. And that about does it for all the 30 implicated suspects, innocent and otherwise. 2. There was no one said serial killer, just a bunch of murderers and multiple serial killers, be they implicated, convicted, executed, or not. 3. If the vast majority, or if not all the victims, let alone the canonical 5, can be traced back to multiple killers, be they serial ones or not, then it's not really a mystery involving one said unidentified serial killer, because either one serial killer didn't kill all of the canonical 5, let alone all the other victims, or one singular serial killer didn't kill all of the canonical 5 victims. Carl Feigenbaum possibly killed 4, yet Aaron killed only 1, meaning that this whole single unidentified serial killer narrative is and was a lie all the same. 4. Whatever the fuck might be found without questioning as to the perpetrators of all the dead victims, one thing is for certain. Jack the Ripper isn't just a myth debunked by many, including scholars. It's also a massive lie because it couldn't possibly be true that only one so-called serial killer that would have done all this, because they didn't. Also, outside of Irish Catholicism's and Judaism's complete condemnation of prostitution in general, which is possibly the bare backbone of Aaron's and other criminals' bloodlust, there really is no mystery because all those people were dealt with over a century ago, and it doesn't even fucking matter anymore because at that time, before DNA evidence was accepted as a way to examine crimes back in 1986 in the UK, they've had stuff like fingerprinting, ballistics analysis, etc. And 5. If this lie of an unsolved case teaches us anything, it's that when it comes to investigating anything that's as heinous as serial killings and serial killers, never open the can of worms before you start fishing. You only do it after so you can find out which worm is right for the taking and vice versa. Because unleashing all the fucking worms out of one tin can can spill its way back into another. Because what the fuck is the point in making a list of 100 people that you think is Jack the Ripper back in the 1970s when you yourself cannot give testimony of an event that you were not fucking even there, let alone alive and old enough to be a real witness of? Well, that, and it would just be redundant given that 20 out of the 30 original implicated suspects were found to be totally innocent. So why bring another fucking 70 to the list? There's just no fucking point. And you know what I think are the multiple killers of the canonical 5 that are most relevant and most important? Aaron Kosminski and Carl Feigenbaum, and that's it. Nothing else, nothing too complicated, but nothing too simple. And that about does it for this video. I am Brian Mullins the Fox, signing out. See you in the next short form commentary video. Bye-bye.